Picture a block of ice. Now picture climbing inside it to survive a night at negative 40 degrees. It sounds like a death sentence. And yet, for thousands of years, that's exactly what Arctic hunters did, and they were often warmer inside that ice than most people are inside a modern four-season tent. Most people assume the igloo works despite being made of ice. That's not quite right. It works because it's made of ice. The material isn't the obstacle, it's the mechanism. And once you understand why, you start to see the igloo less as a shelter and more as a piece of engineering that modern science is still catching up to. Start with the number that shouldn't make sense. Outside an igloo in a typical Arctic winter, the temperature can sit at negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Cold enough that exposed skin can develop frostbite in under 5 minutes. Inside, with just body heat and maybe a small oil lamp, the interior can climb to 40 or even 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a swing of up to 100 degrees, generated by nothing but a person's own body, sealed inside a structure built from the same substance that's actively trying to kill them outside its walls. Researchers studying vernacular Arctic architecture, including work published by the Building Research Establishment in the UK, have measured this insulation effect directly. In field tests, an occupied igloo with a single small lamp maintained an internal temperature roughly 40 to 60 degrees warmer than the outside air, hour after hour, with no external heating source beyond the people inside it. For comparison, an unheated modern canvas tent, in the same conditions, typically registers only 10 to 15 degrees warmer than the outside temperature before the fabric simply lets the difference bleed away. The secret isn't the ice itself, it's what's trapped inside it. Snow, unlike a solid block of ice, is packed with tiny air pockets, sometimes up to 90% air by volume, depending on how it fell and how it's been compacted. Air is a poor conductor of heat, meaning it doesn't let warmth pass through easily. This is the exact same principle behind a down jacket, a wool sweater, or double-pane window glass. It isn't the material that insulates, it's the still air the material manages to trap. Compacted snow, the specific kind Inuit builders selected to cut igloo blocks, keeps most of those air pockets intact while gaining enough structural strength to hold its shape under load. Builders would test snow by probing it with a long knife or antler rod, feeling for a specific density and texture. Snow that had been wind-packed just enough to bind together without collapsing the air pockets inside it. Get the density wrong and you either get a wall that crumbles or a wall that conducts heat away as fast as bare ice would. The result, when done correctly, is a wall that behaves less like a block of ice and more like an insulating blanket that happens to be solid enough to stand up entirely on its own, with no frame, no fasteners, and no external support. Compare that to a canvas or nylon tent. Fabric offers almost no meaningful thermal resistance. Heat generated inside a tent escapes almost as fast as a human body can produce it, which is why campers rely entirely on sleeping bags and layered clothing rather than the tent itself for warmth. An igloo, by contrast, has been measured by polar researchers to outperform many modern expedition tents in raw insulation value, specifically because its walls trap dead air the same way insulated outerwear does, just frozen into a rigid dome instead of stitched into fabric. Then there's the shape, which turns out to matter almost as much as the material itself. The dome structure isn't just aesthetic or a byproduct of stacking snow blocks in a spiral. It's aerodynamic and thermodynamic at the same time, and both properties are doing real work. Wind is one of the fastest ways a human body, or a structure, loses heat, through a process engineers call convective heat loss. A flat wall catches wind directly, creating turbulence and pressure that strips heat away rapidly. A dome, by contrast, deflects wind around its curved surface with minimal resistance, the same aerodynamic principle that makes domes and curved shells resistant to structural wind damage in modern engineering. And because heat rises, a dome ceiling captures and holds the warmest air directly above the people below, rather than letting it escape upward and out through gaps the way it would through a flat or peaked roof. The curve essentially creates a pocket, trapping a stable layer of warm air right where it's needed most. Inuit builders refined this further with something almost counterintuitive. They built the sleeping platform higher than the entrance, sometimes by a foot or more. Cold air is denser than warm air, so it naturally sinks and pools near the lowest point available. By raising the sleeping area even slightly above the main floor level, and digging the entrance tunnel below the level of the main chamber, builders created what's essentially a cold trap, a low pocket where the coldest, heaviest air collects and stays, away from where people actually sleep. Anthropologists that are studying traditional Inuit construction techniques have noted that this raised sleeping platform, called an igloo, can sit in air that's noticeably warmer, sometimes by 15 to 20 degrees, than the air trapped in the entrance tunnel just a few feet away. There's one more detail that seems to defeat the entire purpose of insulation, until you understand why it's there. Igloo builders deliberately cut a small ventilation hole near the top of the dome. On the surface, this sounds like it should simply let all the carefully trapped heat escape. In practice, the opposite problem is the real threat. Without ventilation, carbon dioxide and moisture from human breathing, combined with vapor from a burning oil lamp, would build up rapidly inside a fully sealed dome. That moisture would eventually condense against the warmer ceiling, and condensation dripping from an ice ceiling directly onto sleeping occupants is far more dangerous and far more miserable than losing a few degrees of heat through a vent. The small ventilation hole solves this precisely. It lets stale, moist, carbon dioxide-heavy air escape upward and out, while barely disturbing the stable layer of warm, dry air trapped lower down where people are actually sitting and sleeping. It's a controlled pressure release valve, sized specifically to let the bad air out without letting the good heat follow it. None of this was arrived at through guesswork, and none of it was accidental. Traditional Inuit igloo builders didn't have access to a physics degree or a materials science lab, but through generations of direct trial, observation, and survival, refined by people whose lives depended on getting it right, they independently arrived at 4 separate engineering principles: trapped air insulation, aerodynamic heat retention through dome geometry, cold sink drainage through elevation, and controlled ventilation to manage moisture and air quality. Each of these principles, on its own, would take a modern engineering student a semester to fully understand. Inuit builders encoded all 4 into a structure that could be built from raw materials, with hand tools in under 2 hours. The design proved so effective that 20th century polar explorers, arriving with far more advanced materials, fabrics, and equipment than anything available to traditional builders, sometimes abandoned their own tents in favor of building igloos instead, particularly during extended stationary camps in extreme cold. Roald Amundson's expeditions and later polar research teams both documented preferring snow shelters over canvas tents, specifically for their superior insulation and wind resistance in the harshest conditions they encountered. So the real answer isn't that an igloo is warm despite being made of ice. It's that ice, cut, compacted, and shaped correctly, stops behaving like the material trying to kill you, and starts behaving like the only thing standing between you and it. The cold outside doesn't go away. It's simply given nowhere to enter, while the warmth generated by the people inside is given nowhere to leave. That, in the end, is the entire trick. Not defeating the ice, redirecting it,